Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. We're going to be doing another Unit 2 AP Human Geography FRQ. So this one here is on migration. So we're looking at our stimulus here, 6 EU states that are worried about a popular exodus. Exodus being emigration. They're worried about people leaving their country here. So we have the percentage of the people within these states that are worried about emigration. Remember, emigration with an E means to exit. Immigration with an I means to enter. We can see here that they're more worried about immigration than they are, emigration with an E. They're more worried about emigration than they are with immigration here. And there's a good percentage of people that are worried about both. And then there's about a small percentage, usually around 10% for each country, that doesn't care or they just don't know enough information to have any worries about it. So let's look at our prompts here. So part A, compare the demographic states of the EU countries with high amounts of emigration worry. So what we're doing is we're just comparing similarities between these countries here. Now we're talking about Unit 2 of AP Human Geography. So we're probably going to be talking about birth rates or population growth, maybe if they're an aging population and so on. So you could say that these are aging countries. For the most part, these are all aging countries. They have a negative or close to negative natural increase rate. Their total fertility rate is below 2.1. So they have a low or a very rapidly declining CBR, which is the accrued birth rate. They have a TFR that's below the replacement rate. If you said low total fertility rate, that probably wouldn't count, because what's considered an aging population or population and population decline, which also could work as a response, you would have to say that it's below replacement rate, because the total fertility rate has to be below replacement rate, which is 2.1, for it to be in population decline. So we could say the natural increase rate is low or decreasing, or you could say that it is negative as well. There's a higher life expectancy as well. That's something we see in these aging countries, is that people are living longer. We have a high elderly to youth ratio with these aging countries. We see a lot more older people compared to youth because the accrued birth rate is very, very low. Identify the country least worried about experiencing emigration. So this one is just, can you read a graph? And that's kind of important on some FRQs. You maybe ask basic questions about a map or a graph. They may ask you what the scale of analysis is for a map, or they may just ask you, like with a graph like this, what country is least worried or most worried about immigration? What country has the highest percentage of arithmetic density, or something like that? So for this question, it's going to be Greece. They are the least worried about emigration. We can look at the orange part of the graph here, and we can see that Greece has the lowest orange, the smallest amount of orange on their bar. C, explain one reason for why EU countries would express worry over high immigration rates. So these are kind of those effects of migration. So high immigration that brings a lot of people into the country can put strain on public services that are particularly provided by the government, that are paid for by the people. And these services are particularly usually welfare programs like healthcare, education, public education, housing. And that can create challenges for governments to meet the demand. They can actually lead to scarcity of these services because there's so many people that are requesting them and desire them that the government struggle to meet the demand or pay for them all. Some citizens may fear culture changes or a loss of nationalism or national identity or loss of culture due to this amount of immigrants that are coming in from different countries. They have different traditions, different values, priorities, and cultures as well. There could be increased immigration that leads to competition for jobs, particularly in sectors with lower wages, because those are usually more competitive. Not more competitive. There's more open spaces for those jobs, so they're going to take those spaces. And they're the least skilled jobs, so they don't need education, so more people can fill those spaces. And so that can lead to increased competition in sectors that may have not been so competitive before. So citizens may fear that these immigrants will come in and take their jobs, take their incomes away. There are concerns over national security or crime rates increasing with high amounts of immigration. And that's something we see in European countries today, actually, as we have seen that crime does change when you increase immigration. Rapid population growth from immigration can exacerbate urban overcrowding as well. They want to move to urban cities because that's where the jobs are, and that's where typically the higher standard of living is. So they're going to move to these urban areas that they've known about before. They may not know anything about the suburbs or the rural areas, and that can lead to very crowded urban areas. All right, part D. Explain one way that the economic state of EU countries affects the rate of migration for one of the processes listed. So our first process is going to be emigration. Our second one is immigration. So what we're looking at here is we're looking at economic pull factors to these EU countries and push factors away from their home countries. So these pull factors to the EU countries, these are typically, at least the countries that we saw before, are very developed countries. They have flourished economies. They're particularly more service-based now with a tertiary economy, and they have a higher standard of living. The cost of living is a little bit higher, but it's balanced by that standard of living. They have developed urban areas, and they have a lot of job prospects, particularly in skilled labor and unskilled labor that still exists as well. And countries that people are moving away from to go to these EU countries are not going to be as well off. They may not have as many job opportunities, or they have low wages, low benefits, or bad job security. They may not have any education programs as well. So that's what we're going to talk about when we're talking about the emigration here. What are these push factors pushing them away from their home countries in pursuits for these EU countries? So we see high unemployment, poor job prospects in an economically struggling country. And that's going to encourage people to find jobs. They want to have better opportunities. They want to have an income to support themselves, to support their families or future families. So they're going to go to these EU countries. There'll be limited access to quality education or healthcare because it takes funds to fund healthcare. And that can drive people to move to countries with better public services. Economic recession or instability or inflation or even hyperinflation can lead to higher emigration because people want to live in areas with improved living conditions. And that can be countries that are abroad. Inflation can be very, very harmful for society. It's normal to have some kind of inflation, but if you have a lot of inflation at once, or particularly hyperinflation, a great example is in Zimbabwe or Germany after World War I. Those countries saw hyperinflation. It was very, very hard to live there and be prosperous and support yourselves. And that's not somewhere people want to live. They want to be somewhere where they can afford groceries, where they have good purchasing power. So let's talk about the other process, immigration. You got to pick one of them. So you could have done one, emigration, or two, immigration, and just explain how that affects the rate of migration. So immigration. Prosperous EU countries with strong economies. These economies have been developed for a while. The Industrial Revolution hit them 200 plus years ago, and that attracts immigrants that want higher wages and better employment opportunities. Countries with higher standards of living, they have better health care, social services. They're magnets for immigrants. They bring in a bunch of immigrants. They're attractive, and they look for a better quality of life. Economic growth may increase demand for foreign labor because these immigrants may fill job shortages or shortages in unskilled labor or labor with low wages as well. So that could be something that can draw in immigrants as well. E. Explain one way that contemporary forced migration impacts high immigration rates in Poland. So we can talk about immigration coming into the country. So we're not talking about people leaving Poland. We're talking about people coming into Poland. So the first one here, contemporary forced migration, such as refugees fleeing conflict in the Ukraine, has significantly increased immigration rates in Poland due to its geographic proximity. Poland is close to Ukraine and the shared borders that they have with these countries here. So just going to the next country over, a safer country, a country where they risk death a little bit less, and they have job opportunities and so on. They're going to go to countries like, Poland or surrounding EU nations. Poland's acceptance of asylum seekers and refugees, they have programs that bring in refugees and asylum seekers, has contributed to a rise in immigration rates, particularly during crises in neighboring regions where they have higher rates of refugees emigrating, leaving those countries. Forced migration creates a demographic shift in Poland as a large numbers of the individuals and families arrive. They are foreigners, and they seek temporary or even long-term or permanent residence. Poland's role as a transit or a host country for migrants, refugees, fleeing some kind of political persecution or political instability or social instability will result in higher immigration rates, even if many eventually move further west. Maybe that could be a part of step migration, which we talked about in this unit as well, where people move to one place and then later on to move to another place and then another place before they finally settle in their destination country. The government's policies and international support for hosting refugees in Poland can influence the scale, which is just the extent, and pace, which is the speed of immigration from forced migration events. So that's kind of a more vague answer, but it still answers all the points. The more specific one's probably the first one, especially if you said Ukraine, which if you looked at a map of Poland, you could probably determine, forced migration, that's Russian-Ukraine war. People are fleeing the Ukraine because it's violent there. It's not safe to be in many parts of the Ukraine. So that could be something that came to your mind. A good way to answer questions like this, especially when they say contemporary, where you're thinking about what's happening today or in the past 20 to 30 years or so, you might want to think about some current events and use those to answer your responses. Now, examples themselves aren't going to get you the point instantly, but if you elaborate on those examples, explain why they're relevant, and give the bigger picture, you may get your point for this question a lot easier than just explaining a bunch of different facts about forced migration. F. Explain one potential political consequence in a country experiencing prominent immigration. So this FRQ is really honing in on those effects of migration as well as those causes of migration here. So political consequences, we're going to look at elections, we're going to look at leaders, and we're going to look at policies particularly. We're going to look at movements and social movements and NGOs and all that fun stuff. So immigration can lead to the rise of nationalist or anti-immigrant political movements or social movements, as some citizens may feel threatened by cultural changes or competition for resources. We could also look at just competition for jobs in general. Increased immigration can lead to advocacy for either stricter border controls or more inclusive immigration policies. So they can kind of go both ways. Maybe people are pro-immigration, people are more anti-immigration, or more pro-quotas to immigration or refugees. Governments may face pressure to reform immigration laws, to change them as time goes on and new events occur. And that can cause shifts in policy priorities, party structures, party priorities, as well as just issues within the countries and international relations. Now, you don't have to say all of those. You really can only pick, you could pick one of them. You could say that they may change immigration laws or add immigration laws. That could lead to shifts in party structures, party issues, policy structures, policy issues, international relations, that sort of thing. And you could say just it may change party priorities or party structures with increased immigration affecting political issues in the country. That works as well. Immigration can influence election outcomes. That kind of coincides with that, as political parties will tailor and cater their platforms to address public concerns about immigration. Tensions between immigrants and native populations may result in civil unrest, and that can force political leaders to address the social cohesion and integration issues. So we can kind of see both ways here. People may be pro-immigration, that can lead to changes, and people can be anti-immigration, that can lead to similar changes as well, particularly with addressing international relations, policy issues, political parties, elections, that sort of thing. All right, so the last part. Explain one way that countries experiencing emigration, so people leaving the country, can reduce the long-term effects on their country. And if we're talking about long-term effects, we're really talking about repercussions here on these countries. So the first one, governments can invest in economic development programs to create more jobs and improve wages, and that can reduce the incentive for citizens to leave to go to countries that are better off. Improving access to quality education and vocational training can provide opportunities for individuals to succeed within their home countries, and they don't feel compelled to leave. They can support themselves. Implementing policies to support small businesses and entrepreneurship and just business and economic growth in general within the country can encourage people to stay and contribute to the local and national economy. It can encourage the return of immigrants through incentives such as tax breaks, housing assistance, other kinds of welfare programs, or professional opportunities, vocational training, education. They mitigate the loss of their skilled labor here, because the skilled labor typically brings in more money than the unskilled labor. Investing in infrastructure like transportation, technology, and housing can improve living standards and reduce push factors for immigration as well. So the main thing to kind of look at when answering this question is what ways can governments either draw their immigrants back into the country, so with pull factors, or what ways can they reduce the push factors? Remember, push factors push people out of a country. So that can be something like high crime or a really high cost of living or very, very low standard of living. Pull factors are attractive. They pull people into the country. So stuff like job opportunity, housing, education, good health care, that sort of thing. Strengthening political stability and reducing corruption. Of course, people don't want to live in a corrupt country. That can foster trust in the government. It makes citizens more likely to remain in their home country. So what are some takeaways from this FRQ? So there are 7 points on every FRQ on your AP exam. There are no half points and no partial credit of any kind. You either get 1 point or no points. FRQs in your AP exam are 50% of your score. So if you want to do well in your AP exam, you're going to want to score well and get some points on each of your FRQs. Emigration, remember, is moving out of a country. It is exiting. While immigration, with an I, is migrating into a country, where you're entering the country. So, like on this FRQ, you had a graph that you had to read and understand to answer some of the parts. And 2 of your FRQs are going to have graphs or maps or tables or charts of some kind. So it's going to be necessary to read them, understand them, comprehend them, that sort of thing. And that can be directly where they're going to ask you a question, particularly about the stimulus, or indirectly, we're going to have to use the stimulus to answer questions in a way that's not technically referring to the stimuli. So you're just going to have to use it to base your answer around. It may give information like a current event or an economy, for example. That's going to help you answer questions about political issues within a country or the economy of that country. Economic conditions such as job availability and wages will play a key role in influencing both immigration and emigration rates because they impact the push and pull factors. So good wages, good job availability, that brings in people. Those are pull factors. But if you have bad wages, bad job availability, that's going to push people away. Those are push factors. Conflicts and crises within neighboring countries significantly affect immigration rates, particularly in countries like Poland that are in geographically close to conflict zones. So countries that are maybe shatter belts, those will bring in immigrants as well that are refugees, that are asylum seekers, that are seeking political stability outside of their home country. High immigration, high people entering the country can lead to cultural changes because they're coming in from different countries with different cultures, different religions and languages. And that can exacerbate social tensions as well as political debates and issues. While emigration can result in brain drain, the loss of skilled labor, or demographic shifts in the home country. Remember when we talk about Ravenstein's laws of migration? Most migrants are going to be young males. So that can lead to males leaving the countries at high rates. Emigration can lead to aging populations and labor shortages. Remember, there are young people that typically leave the countries, and these people may have skilled labor if it was a result of brain drain. And that can result in bad workforces, and that can diversify demographics in host countries as well that bring in those immigrants. Immigration can foster culture exchange and diversity because we have people from different countries coming in, and that can enrich societies, but sometimes that can lead to challenges with integration and social cohesion. High immigration can strain infrastructure and public services like healthcare or housing or just public transportation in general. A crowded bus is not fun to ride on, and that can require effective planning as well as resource allocation and funding. And that's the end of the video. Thank you so much for watching. Please like, subscribe. It really does help me out. If you have any questions about this FRQ, leave a comment down below. I'll be happy to answer them. I'll see you guys in the next video, though. Adios.